welcome to Adventures in Life. Our guest is Dr. Benjamin Mortensen. Dr. Mortensen was a chaplain during the Korean conflict, and then following that, on his return home, with the benefit of the GI Bill, I suspect,
yes,
he went to college and received his master's degree from?
Brigham Young University.
In what field?
In counseling psychology.
And then on for your doctorate?
Yes, a PhD from the University of Utah in clinical psychology.
What's the difference between counseling and clinical?
Well, counseling, you're working mostly with normals who have problems. Clinical, you're working with people who have serious emotional problems.
Do normals have problems?
Oh, very much so.
Oh, they do. You mean there's hope for us yet, is that it?
Right.
I see. Tell me, the work of a psychologist, what do you do? I understand you spent some time here in Southern California.
Right. Here in Southern California, I was working in a mental health clinic. I was with a group of doctors, and when their physical problems turned out to have a psychological base, then they would be sent to me for psychological testing and for evaluation, and then for recommendation for what the doctor should do to cure their physical illness.
So a physical illness the doctors treated, but when it spilled over and began to get folks down and give them the blues or whatever it is that goes along with it, then you stepped in to help.
Right.
Your experience helped you to understand a lot of this, didn't it?
Very much so. I kept running into soldiers in Korea that would develop psychological illnesses. One fellow who developed glove paralysis. His hand was paralyzed. You could prick it and pinch it and burn it, and he couldn't feel anything. But that wasn't true of his forearm or his upper arm, and that just isn't the way the nerves work. If your hand is paralyzed, your whole arm should be paralyzed.
It should be.
Yes.
And so you knew this was a psychological thing, and you could work with it with him.
Right.
Did he then develop the use of his hand?
Right. This particular fellow I followed back to a psychiatric hospital, and I talked with a psychiatrist there, and he says, yes, this man killed several of the enemy, and he didn't want to ever kill anyone again, and so he developed this glove paralysis so he would never have to fire his weapon again.
So his brain just said, I reject this hand.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Interesting what happens within the human mind, isn't it?
It certainly is.
Tell me, you were called in on several rather famous cases.
Right.
That caught my interest. I wanted to talk about this to see what insights you could share with us. You've written down some names. Why don't you read off one or two of them, and let's see if we can...
The first murder case that I was involved with was that of a man by the name of William Shockey. Shockey killed a couple on the desert there east of Mesa, Arizona. These were winter visitors. And
you said a couple. Was this a man and wife?
A man and his wife. He killed them right in their travel home and robbed them.
They were just tourists passing through.
Right. And he was sent to the Arizona State Hospital where I was working at the time for an evaluation to see if he was criminally insane or sane. If he was sane, then he would be tried, and at least they would hold a trial on him.
Yes.
I found him to be sane. And
well, what does that mean? Somebody's got to be partly insane to kill somebody, don't they?
well,
Just to go in and find a couple traveling through in their motorhome and kill them?
not in the medical or the legal sense. In the legal sense, if a person is out of contact with reality, they can't help with their defense, they don't know the nature of the charges that are leveled against them, then they're declared legally insane.
I see.
A lot of them fake insanity. And so we have tests to try to pick that up.
This is where we bring in the psychologist.
Right.
I see. Okay.
And I found this man, although he was faking insanity, to be sane. And so he was tried and was given a life sentence in Arizona. Some of the other cases that I worked on up in Northern California, Clay Smith, the Sickle killer. He was
Sickle?
a sickle killer. He took a scythe or a sickle into a camp.
Oh, like a harvesting knife that's sort of curved?
Right.
Those are pretty ugly.
Yes. And he started whacking people that were camped there on the Russian River. And I tested him for the courts, and on the basis of my testing, they found him to be sane. They tried him, and they convicted him of several murders and sent him to the Vacaville prison up in Northern California, and he remains there to this day.
Did he ever tell you what triggered it, what brought it on? What was he doing, slashing the tent and then slashing the people inside the tent?
That's right.
Perfect strangers?
Perfect strangers.
Just people who were camping somewhere nearby?
That's right. And he felt...
Was he drunk?
Yes, he had been drinking, and plus he felt that they were after him. He had these paranoid delusions that people were out to destroy him, and he was going to destroy them before they destroyed him.
He was going to destroy all civilization and all strangers before they got him.
Pretty much. That was his
that sounds
thinking.
pretty insane to me.
Well, yet on the psychological testing, this man was able to achieve 126 IQ on one of the best intelligence tests that we have today, the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale. He was able to mark his Minnesota multiphasic personality inventory perfectly. He didn't.
These are standard tests that most of us have had at one time or another.
That's right.
Okay.
And if he'd have been smart, he would have made at least his personality test look like he had some problems, because his defense was insanity.
But he made himself appear very normal.
Made himself look perfect.
Oh, well, if you're perfect, then you're responsible.
Right.
I see.
And so on that basis, the jury found him guilty.
Were any of these people children?
That Smith killed?
Yeah.
Yes, a few of them were teenagers. And they
He just went in indiscriminately, just hacking people with this horrible-looking...
Right, with this scythe.
Was he working as a farm worker with this thing during the day or something?
No, he just lived close by the camp. And one night decided he would go down into the camp
And you never did find out what triggered it?
No, other than, as I mentioned, he was drunk, and he felt that these people were out to
And they were just sleeping in the
destroy him.
tent?
Yes, they were just sleeping in the camp.
Oh, dear. You've got some more names.
One of the other really interesting cases was the Juan Corona case. And I was called in to test Juan because I could speak Spanish.
I think most people in California will recognize the name.
Right. Juan was convicted of killing 25 people up around Yuba City. These were itinerant workers. When they found their bodies, they dug up the graves, and a receipt with Juan's name on it appeared in one of the graves. And so
that was the only link to him?
That was the only evidence that they had. To this day, Juan states that he did not commit those murders.
I want to come back to this. They tell me it's time that we pause for a public service announcement. Stay with us. We'll be right back to talk more about the Juan Corona case and a couple of others that are equally as famous. Our guest is Dr. Ben Mortensen, who is a clinical psychologist and counseling psychologist. He's got lots of titles. He was a dean and an educator and a professor, And he was telling us about the Juan Corona case. You said this man was accused of killing 25 people?
Right.
Were they all young men?
They were itinerant field workers working up in the Yuba City area.
But they were all of the same gender?
Yes, they were all males. And
they were all about the same age?
yes, in the 20, 30-year
Now,
age span.
these would be people that I would think would be in the prime of life.
Right.
Was he that much bigger and stronger than every one of them that he looked like he could kill each one, and individually or in groups, or what? How did this happen?
This is why I have never been able to reconcile this case to this day, because in testing Juan Corona, I didn't pick up the anger and the hostility, the madness, the meanness that you generally see in serial killers.
There is a common trait?
Oh yes, and we have tests that can pick that up. And but he was very meek and mild-mannered, and he was married, had a family, and
How old a man was he?
he at that time was around 35.
Was he especially big?
No, I'd say around 5'10", maybe weighed 175 pounds.
An average-sized man.
Right. I believe he had a brother that also worked with him. These two drove buses that took these farmhands out to the fields to work.
Yes.
And once we picked up Juan Corona on the basis of this receipt that was found in a grave with Juan's name on it, then his brother skipped the country. And I understand that he fled to Mexico, and in Mexico was killed in a bar brawl. And although I never got to test the brother, I believe that it was the brother that did these killings rather than Juan Corona, although Juan Corona has spent his life in the Vacaville prison in Northern California.
In your professional opinion, he was not the killer.
No.
And yet, wasn't it your testing that helped to put him there?
Well,
I want to, kind of get an understanding of what's here, because
see, in
he didn't
testing
have
him-
the anger that a serial killer normally has.
No. And this was brought out by the tests. But they did have that receipt. And
Well, they might have gone into a store or a receipt for your services if they didn't.
But they found him guilty, and he was sentenced to life in prison. And he's there to this day. In fact, as I understand it, one of the prisoners there has put his eye out. There's a lot of fighting that goes on in these prisons.
Yes, I've heard some ugly stories.
Yeah.
But deep down, you feel that maybe they got the wrong man.
I think they did. But I think the prosecuting attorneys had to get someone. They had to find someone guilty.
Did you tell them that you thought they had the wrong man?
You bet I did.
You did, but they ignored that.
They ignored that. Mhm.
Okay, you have some other names.
I spent 6 years at the Utah State Hospital. This is a mental hospital, working on the forensic unit. The forensic unit treats criminal offenders, and one of our responsibilities was to test criminals to see whether they were legally sane or insane, whether they could stand trial, or whether they should be hospitalized and treated. And one of our famous patients...
Before you get into that, if a person is declared insane and treated, then the crime is excused and they're released and everything is cool in a month or two, or?
In many states, that's true. If
in other words, you've been bad, but now you're cured.
yeah, you're cured now, and
Could there be a relapse?
oh, definitely, and there often is.
That's a little on the scary side.
It is, because in many states, if a person is declared insane and then he's treated and because of the treatment, regains his sanity, then he has to be released.
So he was not responsible for his actions, but if he has a relapse, he's not responsible for the next ones that go on.
That's right.
I don't like the sound of that.
I don't either.
Okay. All right.
One of our famous cases was Ted Bundy.
Yes, I think we've all heard that name.
Ted Bundy was reported to have killed, no one knows the exact figure, but women from Washington to Oregon to California, Utah. We captured him in Utah. He was sent to the Utah State Hospital for a psychological evaluation.
And that's where you met him.
That's where I met him, and I gave him a battery of psychological tests, and this was one of the smoothest, slickest men that I've ever met. Very scary man.
What's it like? Yeah, scary. What's it like to sit across the table from somebody like that?
As I say, it was scary because I felt that at any time this guy could, you know, do something, kill me, and say, well, that's another headline for
But
me.
you said all of his victims were female.
They were all women, and once I started testing him and sort of portrayed myself as a strong person, he didn't try to intimidate me at all. In fact, he was rather cowardly, and but even then I thought, boy, this guy could do something, and this would be another feather in his cap. You know?
In other words, no remorse at all.
None whatsoever.
Now, all of these victims, besides being female, they had other characteristics in common that...
Yes, they all had long, dark hair, and apparently looked like his mother when he was a little boy growing up. And I wrote in my evaluation of him that he was actually killing his mother when he was killing these females that he didn't know, had never met, found them on the street.
Just random selection.
Randomly killing them.
And a lot of them were high school kids.
Yes, in fact, most of them were in their late teens.
Why did you find out any insight into this man? Why he was doing what he was doing?
It's my professional opinion that he was very angry at his mother for the kind of life that she had lived, especially when he was growing up, and that he was out to pay her back. And
now, his father had left the home?
I don't think he had a father. I think he was born out of wedlock. And,
I see.
The mother had raised him, but they didn't get along at all. And he left home at an early age.
How old was she when he was born? Do you have any idea?
How old was
She, when he was born, was this a teenage mother?
I think she was in her 20s when he was born. Mm-hmm.
And that she raised him in an abusive way?
Right, in a very abusive way. Plus, he saw men go in and out of that home that were also abusive to her and to him.
Like a stream of them?
Right.
Which indicates a certain type of activity we don't usually discuss on
That's right.
television. I see. Now, and so he was very angry, and he left home at an early age?
Right.
How old was he when he committed his first murder?
He was in his early 20s.
And it was in Washington?
Yes, it started in Washington. And
Was
then,
his mother in Washington?
Yes, she. That's where he was.
Did he commit the murder while he was still at home, or had he left home before he did the first one?
I think he had left home, and it was shortly after he left home that he committed his first murder. We didn't know really who had committed these murders, and he always denied that he had committed any of the murders until they finally caught him down in Florida, and they held a trial and found him guilty, and then he...
But now, wait a minute. You said you caught him in Utah.
Yeah, we caught him in Utah.
And he was confined, and you were sitting across from him getting bad vibes.
Right.
To say the least.
Yeah.
How did he get loose?
Well, He was sent to the courts for an arraignment, and he escaped from the court.
So it was actually an escape.
Right.
So he was still a fugitive from that point.
That's right. He escaped from a court in Salt Lake City, made his way to Denver, committed another murder, made his way on down to Florida, committed 2 more murders, and that's where he was captured.
They tell us it's time for a public service announcement. Stay with us. We'll be right back. We've got a couple of more interesting cases to talk about. Our guest is Dr. Ben Mortensen. Ben, when Ted Bundy was killing his mother, he was more or less reliving an experience each time he killed each of these ladies. There were 35 of them or something? Nobody
no one
knows.
knows the exact figure.
No.
And all of the bodies have not been discovered.
Were they all killed the same way?
Pretty much. They were strangled, they were choked, and apparently they were sexually molested.
So they all suffered the same fate, more or less. It was repeated over and over.
That's right.
What kind of test do you give this person?
I gave him an intelligence test. Bundy was a very bright fellow.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that.
He had gone to the law school at the University of Utah there in Salt Lake City and was a good student. In fact, he tried to defend himself. He asked to be his own attorney in the courts down in Florida, and he was allowed to do that. And of course, he was reminded that anyone that
I've heard the saying
has themselves for a lawyer has a
fool for a client.
Fool for a client.
Yes,
right.
I've heard that. But he was unsuccessful in defending himself there. But he was incarcerated in Utah, and at that time, did he in any way tell you that he had committed murders?
No, he denied everything. Complete denial, and was very persuasive.
What put you on to him?
His slickness, you know, the way he talked, and the way he made you feel, the way he made me feel while talking to him, you know.
And he was completely cold.
Oh yeah, he was.
Now you said something about the other patients could tell you more about him than some of the staff members.
Right.
What was going on?
Well, after the staff would leave, they worked during the day, and of course all the patients were incarcerated there. They could see how he acted and how he talked.
When the staff was no longer present.
Right. And they could come up with a very accurate report. And we would always have the patients come in and give us a report about patients. And they were very often more insightful than even the staff were, you know. And they could tell us more about whether he was faking good or bad than even our tests could, you know.
Faking good?
Faking
bad?
Right. This is when you try to look worse than you really are, or you try to look better than you really are.
In other words, you're trying to slant the test rather than take it straight on and honest.
That's right.
I see. There's another name on your list, and I want to cover that briefly before our time runs out.
Okay. Another fellow that we had there at the Utah State Hospital was Gary Gilmore. There was a movie made about Gary Gilmore. He killed 2 BYU students there in Provo, Utah. And both of these students were managers of motels. And he went in to rob them. And they were very compliant. They gave him money. And then he had them lay down on the floor, and he shot them in the head and killed them both. And this was
2 separate incidents.
2 separate incidents, but only about an hour apart on the same night. Well, he was caught, and he wanted to declare an insanity defense also. And so we tested him, and we found him sane. And He leaned over. I was in charge of the meeting, the staffing, where the psychiatrists gave their report, the psychologists, the social workers, and even the patients came in and gave their report. And he leaned over and he said, Doc, he says, if you were me, how would you beat this thing? And I said, well, I don't know that you can, because you've already confessed to the murders, you know. And he says, yeah, but just supposing you were me, what would you do? And I said, well, I guess I would say, okay, I'm guilty. Come and execute me. Do it right now. No more delays, no more appeals. I want you to get it over with.
You've already confessed. What have you got to lose?
Right. And I said, I would hold a news conference and make that announcement to the whole world. And he says, why would you do that? And I said, because you'd get every anti-corporal punishment person in the whole world coming to your defense.
Could I say every bleeding heart would run to his rescue?
You're right. And they did.
They did.
Sent him money to...
Everybody opposed to capital punishment suddenly had a cause in this man.
That's right. And he almost beat it. But in the end, he was executed, interestingly enough, by firing squad.
And that's the way he had indicated.
Yeah, that's what he asked for. And
when I heard, I was aware of the case, I heard that he requested this, and I figured it was because of remorse. He was sorry that he had killed the boys.
no, he thought that by asking to be executed by firing squad, he could somehow get out of it, you know.
Oh, my.
That they wouldn't actually do it, especially in a state like Utah, you know.
I want to thank you for being our guest on Adventures in Life, and I want to thank you, our viewing audience, for joining us also. Please join us soon again. Ben?